Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon video. So today I'm going to be talking about pre-releases. Again. So pre-releases are that magical time in the year where we get a new set coming out and we get to experience some of the new cards in said new set a little bit early. The way Digimon likes to do this is in the form of a sealed experience. So what a sealed experience is it allows players to buy packs from the new set, open up cards from said pack, and build a deck out of it and be able to play with those cards. So basically what a pre-release is you're going to walk into your store, you're going to buy 6 packs of the newest set, and build a 40 card deck out of those 6 packs. And the big rule change compared to constructed play is the fact that you could ignore color when digivolving your Digimon. So Digimon ordinarily will have color requirements in order to digivolve, and well, because Digimon isn't designed for sealed and limited play, they had to change and bend some of those rules in order to make it actually possible to be able to play in this type of environment. And the big rule change that they did was just ignoring that color evolution requirement, so that way you could utilize a lot of your cards a little bit easier. But essentially, the game is going to be in a Swiss format, so the longer you play and the more you win, the stronger opponents that you're going to be facing, and your sideboard is going to consist of all of the cards that you didn't use in your main deck. And then outside of that, we do have a couple of other special rules in terms of alternative digivolutions. So when it comes to DNA digivolution, you actually can DNA digivolve on top of any color. So it just opens up a DNA to colorless evolution, and on top of that, the other big rule change that we got was the fact that in sealed format, if you don't have any eggs in your breeding area to use, then you actually could use a rookie and shove it into your breeding area instead. You won't get the card draw, but you still get a body in your raising area to then digivolve safely. So those are the big changes to how sealed format is going to be played compared to constructed play. Then there are a couple of rules that you still have to follow, so if a card is still asking for a particular color in its effect, then you still have to abide by that card's color requirement, and on top of that, if a card does have an alternative name-based evolution to help reduce its cost, then you still have to abide by that if you can. And if you want to read these rules a little bit more in depth for yourself, I'll have a link to them in the description below. So the important thing when going into a pre-release is knowing and understanding the card pool and looking at all of the cards and how they are going to be trying and interacting with each other. So in this set in particular, there are a lot of more specific synergies that we actually won't be able to rely on, and that kind of is unfortunate, but that's just the subset of why Digimon set design isn't necessarily conducive to sealed and limited play. So you have a lot of cards that say they're evolving or they want to evolve off of another specific card that is not inside of the set, and therefore you actually won't be able to get its abilities until that condition is met, which in the set will not be met. So it just kind of changes and evaluates how we want to look at these cards, and this is a good thing on why evaluating these cards and knowing what they're trying to do, especially in the context of not being able to utilize them to their utmost potential, is really important, so that way you have a better understanding and a leg up on what's more important in terms of how you're going to be selecting your cards. So just as a quick example of stat evaluation is something like Guilmon X Antibody. So Guilmon X Antibody is a level 3 Digimon that has a play cost of 4, 0 to Evo on level 2s, and has 3000 DP. He does have an alternative when digivolving condition where we could digivolve him for 0 on top of another Guilmon, which unfortunately we don't have in the set, so we won't actually be able to utilize his when digivolving ability at all, which means that without this top part of the card, we're just looking at the card for his inheritable ability, which is utilizing only half of what the card's potential actually is. So we could take this card and we could theoretically use it, but is that better than utilizing something like a vanilla card where its stats are just the same thing, if not more efficient, even though it doesn't have an ability for us to be utilizing? So this is where card evaluation comes in handy, because is that inheritable ability actually going to be more beneficial, or is that stat line going to be more beneficial than if we were to just use a vanilla card as an example? And when it comes to card and stat evaluation, I have an acronym that came from Magic the Gathering called BREAD. So B stands for bombs. These are your big high impact cards that are going to try closing out the game. R stands for removal, so these are the cards that are going to try to interact with the opponent's field and delete and deal with some of their more problematic cards. E stands for evasion, so these are your more defensive cards outside of removal, so these are the cards that can try to help mitigate some of the opponent's aggression. A stands for aggro, so these are your general run-of-the-mill cards that you want to be trying to aggress with. And D stands for duds. These are the cards that you kind of want to avoid just because their stats are bad and you won't be able to utilize their abilities, or their abilities are just straight up bad and you wouldn't want to use them anyway. But in terms of looking at the card pool, usually it's a good idea to go to a database and gloss over all of the cards and take a look at what they're trying to do, the synergies they're trying to line up, the abilities that they're trying to be playing around with, and kind of go from there in terms of subcategorizing all of these cards in your head. But in terms of looking at what you're actually going to be playing with, usually I'm going to be limiting myself to look at just the rares and below, because most of the time that's what you're going to end up seeing and using in your card pool, and hoping for that SR or secret is going to be a little bit more unreliable. Even though a lot of the game is centered on utilizing your big boss monsters and trying to line up their most ideal stack, in Limited, that's just not going to be super feasible, just because you're only going to be playing around with just a small handful of cards, and your average pull rate for your common SR is going to be 1 in every 2.5 packs, so that just means you're going to be seeing less of your supers and secrets compared to all of the other cards. But looking at just the rares and below, we still have a pretty decent selection of cards that we could use to try to make as cohesive of a deck as we possibly can. And there's still just a lot of different things that we could do because of two-color Digimon being able to open up the doors to various possibilities still being in the set. So as far as looking at what the set is trying to do, usually each set comes with a big theme that is trying to play around with and a mechanic to go into that theme. So the theme of the set is going to be X antibodies, and the mechanic that we're going to be trying to utilize is, well, the X antibody mechanic. So what the X antibody mechanic does is it allows a lot of these Digimon to have alternative Digivolution conditions where they basically could Digivolve onto their base selves for 0 or a reduced cost to be able to gain some additional benefits. Digimon lore-wise, the X virus came in and was supposed to delete all of the Digimon and reset the digital world, but carriers of the X antibody won't be affected by the X virus. So that's kind of the translation from lore to card game, and it's reflected nicely in the mechanic. But unfortunately, in terms of the context of a sealed and limited environment, this mechanic is pretty bad because you don't have almost any of the base versions to use to be able to utilize a lot of these Digimon's abilities. And in the set, we have a total of 1 card that actually could utilize this mechanic, and that's going to be between Salamon and Salamon X Antibody. So we do actually have a Salamon, and Salamon X Antibody just allows us to utilize our Salamon to go into this card to be able to use its ability. Outside of that, on a lot of the higher level cards, you're going to need to utilize the X Antibody option card in order to gain a lot of their abilities on your higher stages, putting a lot of value on this X Antibody option card when you see it to want to run it to make sure that your cards could be as effective as they possibly can. But because there is such a heavy reliance on X Antibody being able to line up your abilities, I actually think that the best way to play this format is going to be more low to the ground. So what I mean by low to the ground is this is just going to be your more stereotypical aggro-based format where you're just going to want to play as cheap and effective cards as you possibly can. So the rookies that cost 2 are going to be super valuable. A lot of the rookies are going to be really valuable at just trying to chip the opponent, considering there's only 1 true blocker in the entire set. So the only card that's realistically going to be able to stop you is going to be Monochroman, and this is going to be another super valuable card when you see it to pull to stop a lot of the opponent's early game aggression, on top of the fact that it is in 2 colors to allow you to try to utilize black and red options a little bit more effectively. And we do have some really good black and red options that we want to try to use. So the best black option that you could try to incorporate is going to be Congo to try to shut off those cheap offensive plays, and this puts puts a little bit more value on some black cards or cards with black in them, on top of the fact that with red you have some really good removal cards in the form of Atomic Megalo Blaster to be able to clean up wide fields. But outside of that, there really isn't a whole lot of other things that could really stop your low-to-the-ground offensive plays. You do have cards to temporarily be blockers, but they're not necessarily the best all the time, just because sometimes they might be a little bit more expensive to utilize, just because, again, the set and cards wanted to be utilized on top of their base forms in order to make the cards as effective as they possibly can, on top of specific synergies needing to be lined up in order to make the cards even more playable. So while the undead cards do look really good, the fact that you do need to see Drachmon in order to make any of them kind of playable is kind of part of the problem, where if you don't see Drachmon, then those cards are basically just overglorified vanilla cards. And that kind of goes into a lot of what the card analysis is going to be in terms of evaluating the types of cards that you want to be utilizing. And I would highly recommend you try to stay away from specific synergies if you could possibly can, just because those specific synergies might be a little bit harder to pull off out of 6 packs. Now, some cards do just have some really good generic synergies, and those are the ones that you're going to want to try to lean more towards into, just because they're generically good. So something like Dorumon here, just by trashing any card with X antibody in its traits, allows you to draw 2 cards. Well, there's just a whole bunch of X antibody traded Digimon, so this card could work with a wide variety of cards in the set, making it a very, very, very valuable card. Similarly, you have something like Tapirmon, where it's just asking for the Digimon to have 2 or more colors to be able to gain the boost off of, which, again, there's still a decent amount of 2-color Digimon, so it's just another really good card to think about using on a generic basis. So these cards with generic level effects that could be used in a wide variety of different scenarios with a wide variety of different cards are going to be some of your more ideal ones to want to search for and try to put into your deck, so that way you could try to make as cohesive of a deck as you possibly can, not relying on those specific synergies. Another really great example of this, if you are trying to run a big boss monster and go all the way up your chain, is going to be Dino Rexmon, just because the ability isn't asking for anything too specific in order to make the card usable. Yes, his Wind Digivolving ability might not trigger because the opponent might not be running a tamer, depending on the tamers that they pulled, but you still have his secondary ability to really take advantage of trying to stop a lot of the opponent's aggression, especially in your lower stages. So there is still a little bit of dynamic between aggro versus control, even in a limited environment. But even though you're less likely to see super rares and secret rares going into limited environments, you still are going to see them, and you still need to be aware of what they're doing, what they could possibly do, the synergies that they could have involved, and how best to utilize them and play around them. So that's still something you also have to be aware of, and we do have some really interesting secret rares and supers in the set to try to swing the game into your favor, depending on the ones that you're actually going to be seeing. Level 7s I don't necessarily think are going to be super highly desirable outside of maybe like Dexmon for a limited environment, considering the opponent could just aggro you out while you're trying to build all the way up into your level 7. And Dexmon is one of the only ones that actually doesn't require you to need to digivolve all the way up in order to make super playable. But regardless, there's still just a lot of really powerful super rares and secret rares to try to take advantage of when you see them. But at the end of the day, a lot of what comes out of sealed and limited environments, it does come down to the pool of cards that you're working with and how you could best utilize those cards that you're working with. So there is a little bit of skill and there is a little bit of RNG, making it a really fun experience, even though it's not the most desirable one. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and down in the description below are a couple of different ways you could support me and the channel. So I do have a TCG Player affiliate link, so when you use that link to buy cards off of TCG Player, then some of that money will go to supporting me and the channel. I also do make and sell playmats over on Overcard Gamers on Facebook, so when you buy a playmat with my design, then some of that money will also go to help supporting me and the channel. And on top of all of that, I do have a Twitch account over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, so giving me a follow and a subscription also helps support me there, and I do play Digimon on top of various other games on that platform as well. So thank you everyone for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.